is our witness. Today is another interesting episode on the eve of International Women's Day, which is actually tomorrow, but in some ways, some parts of the world is today. We thought we'd do something interesting and bring back one of our speakers of Earth is our Witness, Phil Borges, to share some stories, very inspiring stories about four women that he has actually met and witnessed around the world who fought against injustice and oppression and in some ways unfortunate convention to fight the abuse of child abuse, female genital mutilation, sex trade, and many more. But before I welcome Phil, I just thought I'd start with something interesting in terms of a few major milestones in US women's history. 1920, that's exactly 101 years back. Women gained the right to vote in the US. And now this is just a little bit of the US for what it's worth, just to start with. 1955, Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat to a white man, helping launch the civil rights movement. 1963, Equal Pay Act is signed into law. 1984, Violence Against Women Act is signed into law. In 2007, Nancy Pelosi becomes the first female Speaker of the House. In 2021, Kamala Harris becomes the first Black, Indian, and woman Vice President of the US. And yet, even today, in the US and everyone around the world, women are still being abused, oppressed, and in some countries, legally bought, sold, and exploited. So with that, welcome you all, and welcome to our guest photographer, TED speaker, photographer, and filmmaker for social change, Phil Borges. Phil, welcome.
Parimal, we did it. A little bit of technical stuff at the beginning, but we did it. Right. Yeah, those are amazing numbers. And yeah, actually, my grandmother couldn't vote until she was 40 years old. Wow. So yeah, I remember talking to her about that.
Okay, well, Phil, I know you have four short stories today, but very inspiring stories about women and what women did for women and for their communities. So can't wait. If you want to go ahead and share.
So, yeah, I'll share the screen here. And actually, this is a project I did almost 12 years ago. And I spent 8 years doing it. And went around the world interviewing women that had broken the glass ceiling in their communities. And so I'm going to throw a few statistics out there myself.
Yeah.
So of the 780 million illiterate adults in the world, 2/3 are women. And I've seen this scene many times in different parts of the world. And you'll see the man in the back, he's probably the brother who went to school. And often the girls aren't able to because they have so many chores. Women produce half of the world's food. That was amazing to me. And they only own 1% of the farmland. So their access to resources is very limited. 24% of the world's legislators are women. And now this number 12 years ago was 17%. So we're making progress. 12 years ago was 18% in the US. So things are changing in the right direction there. Every 2 minutes, a woman dies in childbirth. That 12 years ago was every 90 seconds. So that's getting better. 800,000 girls are trafficked each year. I don't know if that has changed much. 1 in 3 women has been beaten or sexually abused. I mean, these numbers are amazing. It's hard to believe, but that's from the UN. So empowering women and girls lifts the community out of poverty. And the statistics I've heard is if you give $100 to a woman, about 95% goes into the healthcare and the education of her children. The same amount of money given to a man is much less. I've heard anything from 40% to 60%, but it's much less. And most of the Organizations like CARE and the UN that I've worked with, they've come to realize if you want to get a community out of poverty, get the resources into the hands of women in these communities. It also helps bring security to a country because it just stabilizes the country and there's less wars and less conflicts around the communities that are empowered that way.
Mm.
So I, when I do a project, I have to decide, okay, what's the best way to go about telling this story? And I typically like to take the problem and wrap it in a positive wrapper. So in this case, what I wanted to do was illustrate the problem by highlighting the women around the world that are addressing the problem. So we'll start with a woman in Afghanistan. So I went around the world, and for the book and the exhibition that I put together for the UN and CARE, I highlighted 29 women in all different parts of the world. So Fahima is in Afghanistan, and I went there in 2005. So in 2005, the Taliban had been kicked out. And so the women were starting to come back into the workforce. And when the Taliban took power, they immediately fired all the women. So the women were 70% of the school teachers were women. They were all gone. 50% of the civil servants were women. They were removed. 40% of the doctors were women. So you can imagine what that would do to a community or a culture to have that workforce just all of a sudden overnight taken away. So this is Humeria. She's 11 years old, and 13% while I was there, approximately 13% of girls were going to school. So they were starting to raise their numbers. And by the way, Kabul was just bombed out. I've never been in a country that had been so devastated by war. They'd been at war for 25 years. But anyway, Humeria can't go to school. She sells eggs on the street, making a living, helping to make a living for her family. So the kids I saw were mostly working or begging in the streets. And this is the Russian embassy, what's left of it. And there were 600 squatters living in the embassy. And there's no running water there in the embassy building. There's no electricity, of course, no heat. And it's cold. I was there in March and it was freezing. They're up in the mountains. So the infrastructure has been badly damaged. So here's the story I told in the book. This is Fahima. She's 38 years old. And she started as a teacher in 1985, I believe it was. So the Taliban come to power in 1996, kick out all the women teachers. And so she decided to open a clandestine school in her home, her 2-bedroom home. And she was seeing 130 girls, or teaching 130 girls in 3 shifts in this little 2-bedroom home. Girls were coming back and forth. The Taliban, the religious police were asking them, where are you going? Who are you going to see? And they all said, we're going to see our aunt. So she had 130 nieces going back and forth.
Wow.
And the religious police would bang on the door every once in a while, let us in. And she would have the girls ditch their books. And she had sewing machines set up. They'd jump in front of a sewing machine and she would tell them, hey, I'm just teaching them how to sew. But she was teaching math, science, and a little bit of push to their language and teaching them how to read and write. And so she did that all the way until the Taliban were kicked out after 9/11 in 2001. So, I mean, amazing. They would have possibly executed her.
It's just amazing. I do have a question, but I'll wait till you are done with the story. I don't want to.
Yeah, just a couple more. This is Nafisa. She's 7 years old. She was back in school, and Fahima was teaching, and she is one of, let's see, what's the stats I have written here? Okay, so now, when I was there in 2005, 34% of the students are girls. And so it really started to change overnight. This is the Out of School Girls Project that CARE was running. And these are all the women that couldn't go to school during that period from 1996 to 2001. And they're back trying to get literate, learn how to read and write, get some math education, and start to catch up. So that's it.
It's amazing, very powerful. I know this is not just about beautiful images, but the images are very beautiful and emotional and poignant. So thank you for sharing that, Phil.
Yeah.
If I may ask, what do you feel in your experience gives rise to this oppression? And again, it's not just Taliban. We hear about this all around the world. Where does this come from? Oppression against women.
Well, you know, there were goddess cultures at one time where there were matriarchies, and there are still some around, like the Navajo. But we went through this period of just male domination, and we've been coming out of it for the last 40 years, slowly coming out of it, maybe even longer than that it started. But I mean, just the change in the last 20 years has been amazing. You know, I went to dental school in 1964. There wasn't one female in our class. And when I went back, I did a commencement speech back a couple of, maybe 20 years ago. Half the class was females. I mean, so many things I've seen in my lifetime just change in this respect. So we're definitely going in the right direction. I think it really is going to help humanity when we get to some equity in the male-female balance of power.
And yet all the men come from women. I mean, we all come from the womb of a woman. It's just ironic sometimes. And again, I'm not saying that I'm perfect or you're perfect. We have all, we're all flawed. But it's just ironic sometimes.
Yeah. So this is another story. I don't know how long we have, Parimal, but
okay, let's keep going. Yeah, I think we have 4 stories. I know this particular one is a little longer and it's very powerful. I'm sure the viewers are going to learn a lot from this one.
Yeah, this is a story that happens in Awash, Ethiopia. And there's a group of people called the Afar. There's 1.2 million Afar. And they live in this part of Ethiopia. This white area is Ethiopia. And they are, historically, they've been pastoralists, cattle herders. But with climate change, the desertification of that area has forced them they're losing many of their cattle, and they're now switching to camels because that's the only animals that can survive up there. But anyway, they're very poor. Only 2% of the kids go to school. And the women do most of the work. And I mean, this is what I've seen all over the world in these indigenous and traditional communities. Women do so much of the work. And in the case of the Afar, they build the houses. These are their houses that they build out of straw and branches. They do all the cooking, of course, the gathering of the water, which takes a massive amount of work. Women and girls do all that, the cooking. They even do a lot of the herding. And yet, they're not allowed to make any of the decisions in the community. And the other thing is they practice the most severe form of female genital cutting or genital mutilation in the world. I mean, they literally scar the vagina shut and remove the clitoris. It's a very harsh, I mean, terrible type of FGM. And 12% of the girls get an infection during the ceremony and die of that infection. So it's a very horrible thing. Anyway, it's their rite of passage. It's built into their culture. And it has been for thousands of years. And so a girl that doesn't have that done is considered unclean, can't get married, pretty much will be ostracized from the community. All the circumcisions, all the circumcision ceremony is done by the women. The men never see it, but yet the women can't make any of the decisions about it. So this is a Bai, and I met her because she was assigned to me as a translator when I was going into the Afar area, because I had heard there was this group of women that put an end to FMG in their community. And so I was writing out, I should say FGM, sorry. I usually just call it female genital cutting, but but anyway, so we're writing out to this village where these women have put an end to it. And a Bai starts telling me her story. And all of a sudden, after I hear just a few lines of her story, I'm thinking to myself, you know, really, you're the story.
Wow.
We don't even have to go out and see these women. But anyway, we get out there, but here's her story. So when she was 8 years old, her godfather took her aside and said, you know, you shouldn't do this. This is very harmful. He had got an education. He was living in the capital of Addis Ababa, and he had come to visit. So he's telling her at 8 years old, listen, you shouldn't do this. This is very harmful to your body. It could be very dangerous. And so she took that to heart. And when she turned 12 and her mother said, it's time for your ceremony, she said, I don't want to do it. And her mother said, what do you mean? I mean, you've got to do it. You're going to be considered totally unclean. You're not going to be able to be married. You're going to be ostracized from you've just got to do it. So she had to run away, and she managed to run away and get back to her godfather in Addis, lived with him, and he put her through school. So she graduated when she was 18 from her school and got a job with CARE. She learned some English, enough to be my translator. So she was quite amazing. And so what she did when she got the job with CARE is she went back to her community with the intention of putting an end to the ceremony, to the rites of passage ceremony. And the way she went about it was quite ingenious. She had this job with CARE, so she could go into the community, open up schools. She opened up a school for them, opened up 2 health clinics. Of course, they were financed by CARE. She brought in water for the first time with an irrigation project so that they could start growing corn. They'd never been agriculturalists, and she got them started on that. The women took me out and were very proud of the crops they had grown.
Mm-hmm.
And all the time, she was getting the confidence of the women to talk about FGM. Got it right that time.
Got it right.
So, but it took her 5 years to do that because it was a taboo to even talk about it or even question it. And so she started asking, you know, what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? And the women started talking, and the men heard about it, that they were discussing this rite of passage, and they got all incensed. In fact, one of the men kicked Abai to the ground and said, hey, you've come in here to destroy our culture. There's no way we're going to let you stay here. And she managed to talk them into letting her stay because of all the good work she did. And then she did something quite ingenious. She got a hold of a little camcorder, a real cheap one. And she talked the women into letting her film one of these ceremonies. And once she had that film, she would plan to take it to the men to show them what it was like. They had never seen one because they're not allowed to be a part of the ceremony. But as I said, they make the decisions on the ceremony. So anyway, she sent me that film and I took it. It was just hard to look at, but I've edited it out. So here's some of the less graphic parts. This is an actual cutting ceremony where they do about 12 to 20 girls at one time.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And remember, 12% get a bad infection and many of them pass away from that. So she took that film and showed it to the male jirga, the meeting that the males hold to make all the decisions in the community. And there were 17 guys in the jirga, and they saw that. And they took a vote that day and voted. It was 15-2 to put an end to genital cutting.
That's wonderful.
So this is Haji Waldo, the head of the jirga. He's 70 years old. And what he said was, you know, once I saw that film, there was absolutely no way I was going to let my granddaughter go through it. So he was the head that led the vote. This is Ask Jelly. She is 52 years old. And she, over her lifetime, she headed the ceremonies for many years. And over her lifetime, she said she did, 100 ceremonies, and which did the circumcision on, I don't know how many girls, but anyway.
Probably at least 2,000 with that.
Yeah, probably. And she said, you know, we did it because that's what had always been done. No one questioned it. And they claimed that it came down from the pharaohs in Egypt, the practice. And so it had been done for thousands of years. And she said, yeah, we did it because that's what had always been done. We were in the dark house. I'll never forget her words. We were in the dark house. We just didn't know. And
such a powerful story. Yeah.
This is Hawa. She's 8 years old, and she will be the first girl in her family not to be cut over generations. So that was that one.
If you go back, what a powerful story, how inspiring. And, you know, a few observations that I want to make, if you want to go back one slide, is in this particular case, it was interesting to see that Abe didn't villainize the people who were doing the ceremony. It wasn't about good versus evil. It wasn't about, you know, villainizing the perpetrators, if you will, because she realized that it was coming from a lack of understanding in some ways, and using that video footage changed the way they saw it when they saw it for real. So it's a powerful story for, and the reason I say that is because even right now, a lot of the narrative in the media is good versus evil, right? Or people who are racist versus people who are not. But probably a better way of looking at things is not good versus evil, because we all have the capability to do wrong things. We all do, Um, even in terms of racism, it's not racist versus, not racist, but anti-racist is being aware of our own biases in some ways. I'm sure I do too, is that we sometimes have our biases, whether we realize or not. Some are conscious, some are subconscious. And I think she brought that out in such a graceful way and took everyone with her, which is very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, she realized she had to get the men on board to make the change. At first they were fighting her when they heard her talking about it. Then she realized, hey, I've got to get the men in on this too. And she was successful in doing it. And then they formed this organization that started going around to other villages to help them stop.
Yeah.
So
I'm just going to read a comment.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read a comment. Read a comment from Caroline, who's one of our very engaged viewers. Hey, Caroline. Wonderful that change began with just one girl who said no, the power of a no. It's just very profound.
Yeah, Abaya was amazing. In fact, when I did the book tour, we wanted to bring her in and to accompany me on this tour. And we had her set up to go on Oprah's program, and we couldn't get her into the country. It was just the visa requirements. It was after 9/11, and everybody was worried about people jumping their visas and staying in the country. But Abaya had every reason to go back. She had a husband and kids. She had a good job. But anyway, that was a whole other story. You want me to go on?
Yes, please.
So this is a story that takes place in Ghana, and the woman, Nana Gataya, but everybody calls her Madam Cocoa, because in Ghana, the big crop is cocoa beans. The best chocolate in the world, as you know, comes from Ghana. So they have this huge industry raising cocoa. 60% of the population lives off of forest products. And so these cocoa trees, they grow in the forest, and it takes them about 30 years before they start producing. So it's a very capital intensive, and it takes a long term before they start producing. And so they grow under the canopy of these huge hardwood trees. And those hardwood trees are very valuable, became very valuable. So one of these trees would net the chief in the area where they were growing $10,000. I mean, that's a huge fortune over there.
That's a big amount.
Yeah. And so the problem was when they cut the trees, they would fall down on the cocoa trees and wipe them out. So a tree that took 30 years or an orchard that took 30 years would just be decimated. And so the chief in the village, this is Madam Cocoa here. So the chief in the village where she lived, Dakota Junction, started complaining to the chief above him, known as a stool chief, and saying, hey, you can't cut these trees anymore. They were wiping out our cocoa trees. Plus, it was illegal to cut them. It was illegal because 80% of the hardwood in Ghana has now been cut. And so the government put an end to it. But the stool chiefs were still under the table, sort of cutting these trees and selling them. And so this chief in this village started complaining. So the stool chief above him fired him, and put in Madame Coco because he thought he could control a woman.
Hmm.
But she became the guy's worst nightmare. So she started complaining, said, I not only want you to stop cutting these trees, I want you to repair our roads, what the logging trucks are breaking. It broke down our bridge and everything. And he got incensed at her and threw her in jail.
Oh,
So she
wow.
spent a month in jail, and CARE got its lawyers and sicked him on the stool chief and ended up getting him thrown in jail and got her reinstated as the chief.
Lovely.
So she became the first chief in this whole area of Ghana. And that changed many things. One of the things, she got the roads all repaired.
Hmm.
And it just inspired all the girls in this village to do something extraordinary with their lives. So this is Augustina. She's 13 years old. She works 7 hours a day in the forest growing the crops, but she also goes to school 5 hours a day. And her plan is to be, she loves math. She's real good at math. So her plan is to be a math teacher.
Hmm. Wow.
This is Beatrice. She's 8 years old. And her plan, she's real bright. She's the brightest kid in her class, they told me. Her plan is to become chief. She is
Nice. Nice.
all the
Yeah.
way. And so Madame Coco organized all the women, started inspiring them. They were starting their own businesses. The news got out to other villages around what was going on. Madame Coco became this local legend, and just her influence and her meetings just started this whole wave of women's empowerment.
Hmm. Wow, what a story, and what a great, inspiring, positive story, and a nice end. Very encouraging.
Yeah.
Very encouraging.
Women were amazing. I was just so honored to even be in their presence, you know, the
Yeah.
things they have done and pulled off.
Phil, one question that I'm going to ask, that was asked by one of our viewers early on. You're a man. What inspires you to? And I'm asking this question from a lot of awe and respect for you, and also, you know, someone that has inspired me as well. I got to say, it's amazing that you, a man, are actually documenting these stories and saying these things, which is great. We need more of that. What inspires you? What ticks you in these stories?
Well, what led me to do this is I just saw in the developing world what the situation was.
Hmm.
Just this imbalance, and I really hesitated doing it, to tell you the truth, because who am I to go into another culture and say, this is the way you should do this is the way you should be treating women, this is the rules you should be living, you know, that kind of cultural imperialism, colonialism, if you will. So I really hesitated on it,
Hmm.
because most of the human rights stories I was doing had to do with a government or the government of a country taking over indigenous people's lands.
Hmm.
Government of the Chinese communists taking over Tibet. You know, that type of story where there was this oppression of the whole people. So to get into the gender politics, I really hesitated until I saw how much imbalance there was and how much benefit you could get by changing that balance.
Hmm. Wonderful.
So that's how I decided to do it.
Thank you.
I started talking to people like in the UN, where I was working for, and at CARE. They all knew this. They all knew if they got the resources and education into the hands of women and girls, that was the quickest way you could get a community not only more safe, but out of poverty as well.
Thank you. The fourth and the final story.
Yeah, so this is a Kai. She's in Tangail, Bangladesh. And I put together a little video because there was, at the time, in George W. Bush's presidency, we had a provision called PEPFAR. And PEPFAR stands for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And so he had $15 billion to spend around the world on stopping AIDS. So at the time it went into effect, 30% of that money, well, maybe I should tell you more about PEPFAR at the end of the little video. That
it's a 4-minute film, right? Just to let the viewers know, it's a 4-minute film. Is that right? About 3.5, 4 minutes?
It's very short.
Minutes. Great, let's do that. Yeah. And we'll continue the conversation.
We took this film. Let me play it and I'll tell you about what we did with it. So this is a Kai, 32 years old. She lives in a brothel in Tangail, Bangladesh. But here's the story and then we'll talk about it later.
Over 700 sex workers inhabit the brothel in Tangail, Bangladesh. Many were sold into sexual slavery before their 14th birthday, often by someone they trusted. Once in the brothel, they are so stigmatized, they usually spend the rest of their lives there. Kai was 13 when her aunt sold her to a madam in the Tangail brothel. At the time, she thought she was going to a job at a garment factory. Eventually, she was able to buy back her freedom. However, life in the brothel left her deeply depressed. When a suicide attempt failed, Kai decided to use her life to improve the lot of her fellow sex workers. Although prostitution is legal in Bangladesh, sex workers have lacked basic human rights. They were not allowed to open bank accounts, go to health clinics, have a proper burial, or send their children to school. They were routinely beat up when they demanded that their clients use a condom. Since women over 30 are considered to be sexually undesirable and so stigmatized that they can't leave, they typically end up doing domestic work within the brothel to survive. Despite being arrested 3 times, Kai managed to form an organization to advocate for sex workers' rights. Since her group began, condom use has gone from almost 0 to 86%, and the women have been able to open bank accounts and send their children to school. And most importantly, the number of 12 to 13-year-olds sold into the brothel has dropped dramatically.
So here's we took that film up to Capitol Hill to show it to the members of the Senate because there was a big vote on PEPFAR, $15 billion. I don't think you can see this whole sign because part of it's behind.
We can clearly see it.
Okay, so $15 billion to be spent on combating AIDS and AIDS relief. So 30% of it, or $4.5 billion, had to go into abstinence education. So it makes no sense in places like Tanghal, Bangladesh, to be preaching abstinence. And in fact, they found that all the money that went into abstinence, abstinence before marriage, the sign says she's keeping herself for marriage. What about you? All that money was a total waste. It didn't change anything in terms of AIDS or abstinence. And so what we were doing, I went there with the organization CARE, was showing the film, this little piece to the senators and that we met with, and just saying, you know, this isn't the reality out there. This is the reality. And they did a vote and changed the amount. I forget the amount they ended up with, but they drastically reduced the amount going to abstinence. And I think the program's still in effect, and I don't think there's any money going into abstinence education.
Wow. It's I'm still trying to process the film that you showed, and I didn't realize it was actually legal in Bangladesh. Sex trade is actually legal. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Many of the clients were police officers, and they're the ones that were beating up the women in the brothel if they didn't wear, if they demanded that they wear a condom. So it was bad. But you know, as the film said, the women, they're so stigmatized. I mean, it's legal, but they're stigmatized heavily. And so they can't wear shoes in public. They can't send their kids to school. They can't go to the health clinic. They can't have a bank account. And if you don't have a bank account, you can't save enough money to get out of the brothel. You can't. Once you're in, you're in. It's almost like a lifelong sentence. And most of those women got in there by being sold. Either their parents died or their mother died, and an aunt would sell them into the brothel. And they sell them to women in the brothel who become the madams. And that's the only way they can make a living. This is just a horrible, perpetuating negative
cycle.
Negative cycle, right. Yeah.
It reminds me, I grew up in India, and like any other country, India has its fair share of problems too. And one particular community I remember is the widows of Vrindavan. And these are widows of Vrindavan. There's a place in North India called Vrindavan, where women who are married and their husband died, they become widows. And in certain communities, these widows are considered bad omen because their husband died, as if it was their fault that their husband died. Wow. The husband died in an accident, for example. But no matter what, the women are considered bad omen, evil omen, and shunned from society. And they're sent away kicked out from their homes as a result of it, and have to spend their entire life in the service of God in Vrindavan, where I've heard a lot of abuse happens. It's quite disturbing. But yeah, I gotta say, I think if you're at the end of this, we can take a few questions. Do you want to stop sharing? So I do have a few questions, and I'm also, while you do that, Phil,
I'll get out of
I'm going to invite the viewers to share, their own stories of.
Let me see if I can get out. I can't find my mouse.
That's okay. Yeah.
Can you stop sharing at your end?
Yeah, I can stop sharing. Keep going. Let's see these images. Actually, we don't mind seeing some of these images of Aki's life.
Oh yeah. This is Chandi. She's 17 years old. she's owned, the woman in the background there that you can't see, she's owned by that madam. And that's typical. The story I heard is not only in sex trafficking, but in just worker domination and child abuse that way. 3 million kids are owned by an adult, by another, not their parents. They're owned by an adult for business purposes. And evidently there's almost 800,000 girls that are trafficked a year.
Oh my gosh.
So she's in this brothel, and she's owned by that madam, and she really has to earn the money to buy her freedom. Now, Akai bought her freedom, and she managed to do it by the time she was 18 years old. So she's really unusual, but usually many of these women don't get to keep enough of the money to even buy back their freedom. This is Jasmine. Let's see. I believe she's 9 years old. Let me see.
Oh my God.
And she's so stigmatized by just being in the brothel, just being born in the brothel, that she can't go to school. So odds are the way she will have to survive, in 4 years or so, she will be working as a sex worker in the brothel. I mean, it's just totally tragic. 700 people, it's like a city, this brothel. Here's some of the kids that live in the brothel. One woman started teaching, one of the sex workers started teaching school, and this is their nap time. Some of the kids. Yeah.
Wow, let me stop sharing.
I got it.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you, Phil. I got to say, obviously not pleasant stories, definitely not for the faint of heart, but these are the stories that, however disturbing they are worth sharing and need to be shared. And at the same time, there's hope and inspiration, I feel, given that there is often, as we just saw, one woman who says no or says no to the oppression or the convention can make a big difference. So it's at the same time inspiring for all of us. Do you feel disheartened, or do you overall feel that there's hope?
Oh, definitely. I feel there's hope. I wouldn't be doing it. There would be no reason to do it. As I say, I did this project 12 years ago, and I started going over the stats. They're getting better. I mean, it's a long road, but we got to start somewhere, and it is getting better. And yeah, they are difficult stories. That's what I was saying. I needed to make them palatable at all, is to concentrate on the hero or the shero in this case. That is making the change and fighting the oppression or the glass ceiling that has to be broken through or whatever to make that change.
Yeah. As we wrap this up, Phil, I do want to once again remind the viewers to do share any stories in their own life. I'm going to share a story after this too for, women in my life that have made a positive difference to my own life that would not have been possible, and we all have that. In many ways, all the women in our life are their own superheroes without medals, because at a minimum, they're giving birth to us. I mean, that itself is so profound. If you think of it, men are not capable of that, right? There in itself lies such an amazing thing that, needs to be recognized and not taken for granted. And then beyond that, making sacrifices for the family, raising kids, and it's not an equal world still for men and women. Even in developed countries like yours, it's still not equal opportunity. Far from it, So I'm optimistic. I hope that things continue to get better. But as I invite the audience to share their own stories of women superheroes in their life, I want to wrap this up with a question to you, Phil. is, having witnessed what you have witnessed in this journey of women empowered, what's your one message for us all, and especially men?
Yeah, just realize the importance of bringing not only gender equality, but just to honor each other, and especially the women and girls in our lives. And you know, we can see the benefits that are happening now in terms of the just, you know, right now the educational, I'm sort of mumbling around here, but the education
Take your time. Mm-hmm.
is being raised by the fact that women right now are getting most of the degrees.
Mm.
I mean, the shift has happened that far, and it's just going to me, I think, just seeing this dark period of time where we went from the goddess cultures into this male domination, and now hopefully coming back to equality and sharing our talents with each other and our special abilities because of our gender with each other. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm going to wrap this up, Phil, with a thought. In fact, from Madeleine Albright, who wrote the foreword for your book, Women Empowered. And I got a little quote from the foreword from Madeleine Albright. As US Secretary of State, I was privileged to represent my country in nations around the world. What I remember the most are not the many meetings with high officials in fancy offices, but the inspiring people and women in refugee camps, rehabilitation centers, safe havens for trafficked women, and clinics for mothers with HIV and AIDS. These are the places where the human spirit undergoes its toughest tests. Phil Borges' women empowerment is about hope based on reality. It rests on the premise that the ancient enemies of human progress, poverty, ignorance, and disease, can be defeated and will be defeated through the empowerment of women. So with that, Phil, thank you so much for joining and for sharing the stories. And thanks to all our audience. If you like this and inspired, please don't forget to share. These are the stories that need to be heard by many people around the world, especially men. Thank you.
Thank you, Parimal. Hope to see you again.
We will.